Hello and welcome everyone to this webinar on influencers, who they are and how to pick them for your business. My name is Alistair Wheat. I'm Head of Product here at Onalytica. We're an influencer marketing and data insight specialist, and we're delighted to have with us today Ian Moyse, who is himself a social influencer and previously rated #1 cloud computing influencer in our own Onalytica influencer ranking reports, and as well as appearing on in various other influencer grids on IoT, social selling, and data security. Ian is the sales director at the Salesforce cloud telephony provider Natterbox, and has also blogged for the likes of Oracle, Equinix, Miller Heiman, Maximizer, and many more I'm sure I'm missing. So Ian, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Alistair, good to be here, and hopefully we'll have a good chat as we have in the past and give some value to your audience.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so today we're going to pick up this very broad topic, which I'm sure people have heard about already, the topic of influencers. But obviously, influencer marketing can mean all sorts of different things to different people. I'd be interested to know when you first heard the term influencers being used in your career. And you've been. It's interesting because you've got a sales role, but you've also do a lot of marketing work, and you've also been both working with brands as an influencer, and also you are working with influencers to help promote Natterbox. So it's great to have someone who can talk about this from sort of both sides of the fence. But Ian, just I thought I'd kick off with a question, just which kind of gives you a chance to say a bit more about your background and what you do. But how have things changed in the years you've been working in sales and marketing? What have influencers brought to the mix in terms of how both sales and marketing professionals think about engaging with their audiences?
Yes, that's a good one. It gives good context, because that's how I accidentally fell into this bucket of influencers or micro-influencers. It wasn't I set out to do it and understood what it was. So the buyer dynamic has changed. So and this you said I'd get involved in marketing, etc. Inherently, the two are overlapped and always have been, and increasingly are. And in terms of the buyer, whether it be B2C or B2B, we've all changed. We're all the buyer. If you think about it, when I talk to audiences, I always portray, think of yourself right now. How do you buy things? It's different than it was not so many years ago, and certainly 10, 15 years ago, when we didn't have social media, and we didn't have all the tools we've got today, as we've had with Web 2, and you can argue Web 3. So think, those listening, when you go to see a movie, how many of you quickly glance at IMDb just out of curiosity before you watch a Netflix movie? Oh, we're not going to watch that. And the average it got was 2.4, but this other one got 7. Which one are you likely to watch? So that's influencers on you making a personal decision, and they're people you don't know, right? But what you're looking at is that crowd theory of opinion. We do the same on lots of different things. If you're going on Amazon, who doesn't look at the reviews? And the big one for me, I always start as a little bit of a joke, is when you get an app, perhaps in your iOS store, it's a 59p app. How many people glance at the rating and then consider whether they get it or not? It's 59p. This isn't a 40, 45 pound, 100 pound, 150 pound piece of software or game. It's throwaway type prices. But the natural behaviour is you can't help yourself. Look at the star rating or whatever they use, and often just glance in at it. How many have voted? Oh, maybe I won't go for that then, because it's not that good, even though the risk is low. The behaviour of that buyer, and that is us as humans, has changed because the technology world around us has taken us into that. Not because we all wanted that or thought we wanted it. It's the old Apple syndrome. We weren't there asking for it, but someone created it, and we've all jumped at the opportunity, right? So the most of us are on some sort of social platform, and like it or not, we get influence. We hear about it with the American elections and the influence that went on rightly, fairly, illegally, etc. But often people don't sit and think about the influence. It's just naturally pushed to you. You see something on Instagram that's a nice advert. You don't even look at it as an advert. It just appears in your feed. Oh, that'd be neat for the kids. You click on it, and they've enticed you into buying something. And often that thing doesn't come directly from the advertiser or the provider any longer, and this is where the influencer comes in. It's coming via a third party. It's using some other way of getting your message, your product in front of someone that looks like it's got independence. So you're not blocking out the advertiser. So one of the first indications that, I think this started is in the movies. There's not an advert in a movie, but there is, because there's product placement. But it was subversive, it was subtle, and you'd see a product placement, whereas if there was an advert, you know blatantly what that is. But by seeing it in something you're endorsed by, we've seen it for years in adverts with celebrities advertising products, from the old cigarette advertising, alcohol, now gambling, all the different products where they get a celebrity on there. And that is an influencer role, right? The celebrity is by association, they've chosen someone they think that their buyer persona will associate with. So you wouldn't use some hip, cool pop star if your product is targeted at 60 to 70-year-olds. You choose someone in that market dynamic. And it's the same with social media. This is just a different method and a different delivery mechanism for doing those same type of behaviors.
And it also gets, that B2C behavior has transferred into the world of B2B massively, hasn't it, as well?
Yeah,
like
and that's really
this Forrester diagram here.
That prompts me for the end of my answer. I guess that's really how I got into this, was being a sales leader, the environment to get to customers, to get in front of them, that first part of the pipe got increasingly harder and still does today. We've gone from what used to be, I forget the stat exactly, but it was something like 2.6 phone calls on average to get through to a target prospect, to, I think the average now is 8 point something. So it's jumped up over the last 5-6 years. It's just harder. So I fell into using social in what's termed social selling. I won't go into it in detail now, by accident, just trying to find, how do I continue to have my teams be successful? And trying to find other methods. Before it was called social selling, before all the training and the approaches. Now it was just trying to find what works by trial and error. So I went the hard route, and that's how I accidentally got into understanding a little bit more about social media, how you can use this in a creating business opportunities, leads, prospects type environment. And the more you get into it, the more subtleties you learn. And that's how I got into accidentally becoming on your list and other people's list as a micro influencer in the sectors that I specialize in.
Yeah, and with the B2B buyer, then, I mean, obviously as an individual, they are influenced by the behaviour that they picked up as a consumer. But then the actual dynamic in the sort of collective decision making in B2B has also changed as part of that, hasn't it, as well? When there are multiple stakeholders in an organisation and all influencing each other. And it's kind of the influencer category can be external as well as internal and internal there.
We now live in a more connected world than ever before. So it's the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You can identify someone who knows someone who knows someone who links to someone. So you may be trying to target or speak to someone in a business. What you look for is, what connections do you have in common with them? But also, who do they know? Who are their influencers? And that's one of the key with this influencer piece. It's, how do I get my message, or how do I get noticed by my prospective audience, my buyer persona? But you may be able to identify your buyer persona is X, Y, and Z. You may be able to search for that. We're all used to the market of being offered every list under the sun as your prospect customers. Whether that's accurate or not, and we've all had those, I'm sure, experiences of getting bad data lists based on a promise. But even if you have good data, or you look on LinkedIn, you've got GDPR that now affects what you can do and behave. If you know who your buyer persona is, you can filter it down. What do you then do? Do you directly just blast them like the old style? Do you try and nurture them and put them through a nurture using inbound marketing type, all the plethora of tools out there like Pardot, Eloqua, Marketo, HubSpot, etc. And not saying they're not all worthwhile considering, but they're not the be all and end all. That you need to layer and have a layered approach. But you can't just blast them. We'd like to talk to you now. So how do you get them to notice you? And a good way of doing it is the less direct, which is through a social influencer, i.e., who do they follow? Who do they listen to? And that can be a plethora of different things, depending on B2C or B2B, depending on the type of your product, high value, low value, transactional, complex sale, as to how you utilize these tools. So to give you an example, a transactional B2C product, you're looking for a much more high-profile influencer probably in the market in that sector. So if it's in the gaming sector, there are gamers who are professional gamers who are known. If it's in fashion, it might be one of the Kardashians if you've got the budget. It's how do I get my product associated or shared to the audience? Who has my audience? Who has the persona I'm looking to address? Who do they follow? Who do they look to? Which journalist, which influencer, and which magazine, whatever it is? Because if my message comes to them via that, it's anonymized a little bit. It doesn't come across. It's like an advertorial, right? It doesn't. Sometimes you look at an advert, you're not sure whether this is an advert or not, but it's engineered to be that way. And that's what you're doing with social. You're trying to soften, but it's not a brash advert. It's an opinion piece, maybe. Someone's attended your event. And influencers are often, and I've been hired to do this, attend events and provide commentary afterwards in a blog, or just do your thing. Because it coming out from that influencer softens it, that it doesn't appear like a blatant advert, but your message gets through or your brand is mentioned. And it's it's an ongoing nurturing piece. It's rarely, unless in B2C with a fantastic buy it now type simple product, something that instigates immediate behavior and reaction.
Yeah, you mentioned GDPR there, and I do have a question about that, but we'll come back to that later. But then talking about, you mentioned also different types of influencers, and I think it's an important point to get across, because I saw an infographic from an influencer marketing platform recently, which stated very matter-of-factly that 95% of influencers were female, and that 100% of influencers were on Instagram, which, I mean, if you are just looking at, let's say, fashion and beauty and maybe food as well, that might be the case. But it's kind of strange, I think, that the word influence has almost become synonymous with this concept of someone who just spends all day basically on holiday or just doing creative stuff, and occasionally them post pictures of themselves on Instagram, and then maybe one out of every 3 or 4 posts is paid for by a brand. That is one type of influence. That may be the one that's getting the most sort of marketing money thrown at it. But we know that influencers come in all forms and existed well before social media existed. And you mentioned a couple of different types. How important is it for, and we'll come on to the persona of the influencer in a second, but how important is it for sales and marketing and comms people to really think about different categories of influencers and therefore have different strategies for the different types?
I think it's critical. There's 2 sides to this. I think one is which influencers are right for you. So I'm going to give a real extreme example, but the Kardashians, they've made a fortune right out of this with jewelry and dresses, etc. And the royals do it as well, not because they pay or anything else, but if one of the royals, Kate for example, or now with Meghan, wears a particular dress, it sells out on the high street. You see it on social, but that hasn't been engineered. Hopefully you can't err and sponsor the royal family, but if they do, it gets shared on social. Where can you get this dress? So it's not really influencers do it, but by the nature of it, it shows the example of by stuff getting shared around and people seeing it, it drives demand. Now, the Kardashians took that to extreme and were being paid a fortune for this. But you only do that if your product fits, right? If you're selling a complicated technology router, you're not going to be interested in the Kardashians featuring it, because the audience that follows them is highly unlikely to be the audience that you're looking for.
I'm sure they'd still take money to promote a router.
Oh, I'm sure they
on
would.
Their feed.
I'm sure they would. So it's really key to understand from the marketing perspective who your buyer persona is, and that's nothing new, right? So a lot of this overlaps traditional marketing methodology. Who are you targeting? And what's your dynamics, and what do they look for, and all that stuff? Because then you can start to look for what type of influencer do I want? So if it's a highly technical product in a highly competitive market, and you've got something that someone may say, it might be as you've got on your side, just looking industry expert. It might be a business leader of the transformational effect it's had in their sector. If you're in a particular sector, like charities or the not-for-profit. A high-profile spokesperson in that representing or sharing stuff on you, not promoting, but it might be their case study on them. It might be an interview with them, that they're then sharing out and they have a big audience. Perhaps they're an influence in that market. But often the person you want to do this and can help you isn't known as a social influencer, but they have influence in their market, i.e., where if they post something on LinkedIn or they speak about something, it gets profile because of who they are in the sector that you want to address. So the audience you're trying to get to would listen to them.
Yeah,
and that's the key. If you don't do it that way, you can do loads of social stuff, you can do loads of getting influencers to do stuff, but if they haven't got the right audience or profile to align with your goal, you're not going to get the result you want. You're just going to get noise.
Yeah, I think that brings us well onto this slide here, looking at the different personas and making sure that you've got a kind of a mixture of different types of influencers in your overall strategy, because as you said, that there'll be some influencers who are very knowledgeable or very creative and they're great content creators, not necessarily the best at knowing how to maximize their own social channel. They just focus on I don't know, doing a great painting, or they write a technical blog post or whatever, and that content can be really useful if it's a guest post on a brand's blog, or it's part of some video that a brand does that they get the creative influencers to take part. Whereas the other influencers are maybe not, their strongest thing isn't that they're super duper at content creation, but they're a great networker, a great amplifier. They're curating content from all sorts of sources, and people follow them because they know they get a steady stream of really interesting articles on that particular topic. But you might not invite that influencer to come and do a talk at your next event. But you kind of need all these different types, don't you?
And also the different medium types. Video, I'm sure everyone's heard this to death, but we're in the world of video now. Everyone's got much greater bandwidth, even on their mobiles. And people are visual. So this isn't about just getting content out there. It's about what is the content, what you're trying to get across in your message before you even get to the influencer. What is the content is king type, the content is queen type thing. Content is still important. But what you'll get when you approach influencers, you've got to think of how you engage with them and what they're looking for as well. Because if you approach them with, I want you to promote blatant advertising for us, blatant product pitch or whatever, it's not what they want to do, right? What they want to do is be, as an influencer, and speaking from myself, is if someone comes to me with that, it's like, well, why do I want to share that? Yeah, you can pay me to do it, but what I really want to share is some thought leadership type content that you've got that may lead people to you, but it's more engaging content for the audience I've got. Because if you think about it, if you're an influencer and you just take loads of people approach and just take paid from each of them to just share product information, you're going to lose as an influencer your influence and followers, because they're just going to get all you are is a paid advert. What they want is insights. They want interesting information. And when I share on social, I say to people, and I advise different people on this, is you need to think what you're putting on your feed. And I look at so many generic company feeds as it is, and you've got product info, aren't we great, product info. You need to blend it a little bit of different styles. And the 4-1-1 rule is, for every 4 you do, you can do 1, which is a product pitch. So you might do some which is insight, some which is sharing other people's content, which fits your profile of your audience. So there's other articles other people have got. So you're not just cultivating your own stuff. Don't be afraid to share others in there to give it a mix. Some which can be humorous. You can put something in there which is topical. Maybe we're in the fit to the World Cup now. There may be some topical language. Something that's neutral. It's not going to cause offence or stir, but mixes it up a little bit and gives you a bit of personality. And then a little bit on product if you want. But you want that blend. So someone looking at it isn't, this is just boring, and I see I'm not following this, I don't want this in my feed because it's just hit me all the time. Whereas if you're slotting in an advertorial piece, maybe it's a blog content, maybe it's something about winning an award, something that's drawing positivity towards you, if it's slotted in amongst others, people put up with it, right? It's like the product placement in a movie. If it was every 2 seconds, there was another product, it would become laughable and distracting. But what they do
like
is
James Bond, basically, you have that, don't you?
Yeah, it's about being subtle. Yeah, it's about being subtle and getting it across there in a way that blends in naturally to it. So if you approach an influencer, think about what content and what you're going to ask them to do as well. Because whilst what you can argue what's in it for them is however you're going to compensate them, it's also they're considering, do I want to share this content? It's not, I'm just going to share anything.
Doesn't that then, just move on to the next slide here as well, this whole issue of control plays in, because maybe if it's a comms person doing the influence marketing work, they might be used to working with journalists and just knowing that they can't tell the journalists what to say, whereas perhaps people more familiar with marketing, advertising as a background, maybe more from the space where they can pay someone to say exactly what they want them to say. Influencers can be between both of those ends of the spectrum, and as you're saying, it's better if it's really coming from the influencer themselves. But how does the brand adjust to reconcile with the fact that the best way of working with an influencer may be just to take the risk that they might not say what you want them to say?
But there's a mix here, right? You can work with them to tune what the message is and discuss it. You can talk to them, right? So that's the first point, and they may push back, but you can have a conversation to come up with content you're both mutually happy with. So it doesn't necessarily need to be done in a vacuum, that you say to them, I want you to do some influence for me, and then you just wait and see what they do. So it needs to be a conversation. And Tim on there, I agree with this comment. Tim I know well. I'm on the board of Tim's company, hence we got to know each other through social influence. That's how we found each other. And I'll come on to talk about that. I'm sure our social influencers, unsurprising or surprisingly, a lot of us know each other and find each other if we're in the same sector. But to go to your point, around social media, I think there's been a control concern from brands anyway. And I've seen this in companies when you look at social selling or social advocacy, trying to control what their employees put out and their messages. Just send something out. We've created something, ask all your employees to reshare it. Well, that's you might think that's getting amplification, but do your employees have the followers that are in the same audience, firstly? Do they have that base? And that's just blatantly seen repeating something, as opposed to giving permission, as you need in social selling, to use their personalities, and there needs to be some trust. And the challenge, I think, for marketing and brand control of this is, as you've described, you need to start to let go a bit. And it's scary, because what if something happens on social, someone says something they shouldn't? Now, you can give them guidelines, as you can with a social influencer, but you can't blatantly say, this is exactly how you're going to do it. And that's the bit that often scares marketeers, because they're used to having control. Nothing goes on the website, nothing goes on our own company social account, nothing goes out with journalists, as you said, or advertising. No one's allowed to talk to the press unless it's these named press speakers. We're controlling what gets said, but you're not, because go on the internet, pick your product, go on, if it's in the technology world as I am, go and look at G2 Crowd, Peer Insights, Cura, all the review sites. Your customers are posting reviews on you can't control. We're in a world where people talk. If you do something bad, someone tweets it and someone shares it, and other customers, if they've used the right hashtag, find it. So you're in a world where you can't control everything any longer anyway. And the question is, do you try and stick your head in the sand and protect the old world, or do you figure out, how do I adapt to this new world, knowing some of it is out of our control, knowing sometimes something's going to go wrong, but you get more good, and I think Tim's message, than you get bad. Or do you restrict yourself from all the good and let your competition do it, and you become a laggard because you're too scared? So, I'm not going to do it just in case of the risk. Instead of seeing the upside, I'm a pessimist. All I'm going to see is what if, and then I'm not doing anything. It's a difficult balance. I understand marketeers how that's difficult. The world's changed around us. And
and you've touched on this already, that a lot of this is about, I think, taking a more long-term approach. And I think it's tricky, maybe in the B2C space, there's maybe more of a temptation to go for a kind of short-term transactional approach where you can hire a bunch of influencers, give them a brief, they post something, you get a quick result. You've maybe got potentially some easy to measure metrics because you've got a campaign and you had a link that they posted out and there was a quick transaction off the bat and you can think, great, we've done it, that's finished. Whereas maybe when it's to do more with your corporate reputation of your business, or it's more of a long-term, or a B2C product like maybe a car or something like that, where you're looking kind of longer-term brand building. It's not kind of a quick purchasing decision, or it's something in the B2B space. You've got that longer-term piece, you talked a bit about the importance of kind of getting yourself into the community of influencers, and that sometimes what you're doing is actually creating a chance for influencers to meet each other. Can you talk a bit, through your experience of where you've seen that work well, where a community of influencers have actually, a brand engaged not just with an influencer, but maybe through the influencer connected with other influencers, or they've consciously tried to build a community that they can be part of, and what that then means for them?
Yeah, there's quite a few of the large technology vendors doing this now. So I've been to some events recently. And so this is the interesting part, right? Often the brands, and this is what I've observed, the brands don't realise a lot of the influencers in the same community know each other. So I've gone to an event where I bump into 4 or 5 other people, all has to be doing influence for the same day, and we all know each other, but none of us realised, or we realised that day or the day before because we follow each other and you see each other's social shares and go, oh, you're going to it, so am I. And the brand hasn't realised you know each other, and on the day sort of gets that surprise of, oh, so you know such as Tim, for example, I bump into often at different things. Do you know Tim? Yeah. So a couple of things. One is a lot of...
They will know if they're working with us. That's one of the things we always look out for.
So a lot of brands are getting influenced along to events, and that's something I've experienced, to, at the event, give commentary. Come up with a blog afterwards of what you saw, do a video interview on the day, which gives them more content to use on their own channel. But they know if they've looked after you and got you to something, and whether, sometimes it's a free trip to something, or it's a paid event, or it's a freebie of whatever product is, if it's relevant and you want it. So, but there's different things, but there's an incentive to do it. But what they've positioned is, it's just to be there. Knowing that you're not going to do anything hugely derogatory, right? You're not that naive that you're going to do that, but it's your open book to report on and do how you wish, and whether that be, and what you'll find is the social influencers know how to do the different games and tricks to make it interesting through interviewing each other. That's been something that happens. The different influencers find each other at the event and go, give me some words, and they'll put it on vice versa. Through to doing using different video techniques at the event, then doing a blog afterwards and share it. So there's a plethora of things you get out of an influencer being at your event of contribution, and you just leave them to it. Leave them to it for the event. You target and agree what the fee is and what the press is you want them to do up preamble to the event, during the event, and after, as a generic sort of thing you want, and a blog after and this sort of thing, and a video on the day, guys. But you let them drive the content, because they'll give you good stuff, right? Because the thing about influencers, if you get the right influencers in the sector you're addressing, they're going to know their stuff, they're going to have a view of the market, they're going to have a follower base, but also an influencer base as a knock-on effect. So what I mean by that is, if I share something on cloud, if I want, and this is what goes on behind the scenes, it isn't by accident that a lot of other cloud influencers share it, because we help each other. So often there are micro groups that go on that people don't see of discussion. So there is a big group of cloud influencers around the world, and we all talk to each other, and we help each other out. So if, I've got people in Australia, US, etc., and through social, we found each other, and we keep finding others, and you join this group. So it becomes like you're all mates, whether you've met in person or not. And over time, you end up meeting in person a lot of the time, and you do each other favors, which means the brand gets that benefit from you as an influencer to your extended network.
And where do you talk to each other? What platform do you kind of communicate on?
It mixes. Sometimes there's a group on WhatsApp with a ton on it at the moment, which is a closed group. There's a group on Twitter. For the cloud side, so lots of different places. I think what happens I've seen is whoever tends to start that discussion invites others, and that's where it tends to stay on that platform. But if I'm sharing something or helping a particular provider out, I'll often call upon my network of other micro or global influencers and say, do me a favor, reshare this, or do this for me, and we'll do it for each other, because we're all benefiting. We're not really in competition. And even when we go to the same event, we don't see it as competition. We're all complementary and we're all friendly. So we all help each other out. And I'm sure that's happening across all the different sectors, right? It is the bloggers, you get to know people who are doing the same thing as you as a community, and you start to interact and if you use the right influencer for your environment, they'll bring you a knock-on effect through the network that they've built and the people they know.
Yeah, good points. You mentioned one thing I'd like to expand on a bit more is this concept of what we call the equal value partnership. So that it's not always a case of you just pay money to an influencer, although sometimes that will be the case. But it's more about paying the influencer for their time rather than paying them for their opinion, which I can't remember who I first heard that from, but that's a very important point. But in some cases, the benefit to the influencer is not that they're getting paid; it's that they're getting the brand's actually helping them get into their influence community if they don't already have a big network, or helping them to strengthen relationships with other influencers, or it's giving them access to. Might be that the brand helps them make a video with additional production resources that they don't have access to themselves, or it's getting an inside track on what the company is doing that they can write about. So, there are all sorts of things that brands can do to benefit the influencer rather than just paying them. But of course, if they are going to pay them, it's maybe doing things to cover their expenses or stuff like that. What are the most sort of creative ways you've seen brands and influencers work together in that mutually beneficial way?
So I absolutely agree. It's a mix, right? Time's money, right? So for anyone, you're taking their time. What you're going to weigh up, and the bigger, and it varies. Let's be frank. Let's go the extreme again. Kardashians, you're not going to get through doing a favour or inviting to an event. Full stop. They're going to want the world, right? Because the value they've got. If you're the right product, they're going to charge a lot, and they can demand that. So you get a various in different markets and B2C and B2B. But yeah, it isn't always about the cash. It can be the profile for that. So I get invited often to speak at events, and while you're here, can we do a video and do some influence? But they give me a platform to speak, and you weigh up what's the cost of you getting there, depending when it is. Maybe they pay travel, and they'll pay you the flights and hotels, but we're not paying you a fee. But we'll profile you on the website, we'll do this, and we'll share you. So they help raise, as an influencer, your bio and profile. So there's a quid pro quo, there's a different value. The thing for influencers is, are you giving them value back that equates to the value or cost it's in their time that you're asking from them? And often it's not that expensive. The more you ask them to do, the greater, right? If you're asking them to do 23 blogs, attend 10 events, and do 30,000 social shares, and it's got a different cost than we just want some fundamental things. We'd like a short blog, we'd like this, and we'd like you just to come to a short event that's near you. So that's how you weigh it up. There isn't this fixed schema of, because they're all different, but you've got to think what's in it for them. Because I've been asked to do some, as have some of the other social influencers, where and I've just been asked to do one, funny enough, in the US. We'll fly you there for 4 days, and we'll give you a hotel for a big vendor. Fantastic. Okay, that's good. But I looked at it and thought, well, okay, I've got a day job. That's 4 days off of work. I can't justify the value of that, so that's 4 days out of my time. And I've got to do all this stuff for them, for the flights and hotel. And I don't particularly want to go. It'd be a great tick box for me, but it's not enough to justify what they're asking of me. So I turned it down. Now, if it had been, can you come and we're paying this fee, that would have outweighed. There's a balance of, there wasn't enough value in it for me for what they were asking me to do, because it was the other side of the world. And it's going to take 4 days out plus travel, even though there's no cost to me. I'm not coming out neutral right at the end of it. I'm not coming out costing, but it is, because it's 4 days of my time for nothing. And talking to a lot of the other influencers, it's the same sort of thing I get. They weigh up. If it's 10 minutes around the corner, it's a lot easier to make the decision. If it's a day out, or 2 days out, or 3 days out, there is a cost to me. So what am I getting back in return? And if it's just the trip, I don't need the trip. I've seen others give, as I said, their product. So it could be whatever their product is. If it's of high value, I don't know, if it's a video equipment or if it's PC based. Because also then you've got them using your product, VR units and stuff like that. So it's getting the balance, and sometimes that's easier, because if it's a product influence of a product they would get benefit from, by allowing them to have the product, you get both anyway, if you think about it, because they get experience of it. Therefore, they're going to talk about it better, etc. If you've got a good product and you stand by it, and your product costs you less than they would pay in retail anyway, so it's probably got less cost to you and more value to them. You just got to figure out what's appropriate for what you're asking them to do, and have a conversation. It's not a vacuum. Have a conversation with them.
And then that can also apply, I suppose, in a different context, but with employees. Sometimes influencer marketing professionals that we work with, or brand managers, PR teams, who want to get their own employees more active as advocates. They're not obviously going to. Well, I mean, the company's paying them a salary, but they're not. The staff members not being paid specifically to, promote stuff on their personal social channels. But there still needs to be that kind of equal value partnership that sometimes the employee is getting something out of it to really help boost the brand that they're working for.
The advocacy programs I have a little bit of an issue with, because what I see happen is, as I described earlier, we produce some content or something on social, and you pump it out to your employees and say, share this. Well,
that's not advocacy. We just call that employee amplification. That's just boosting.
You need to think about what you're doing, because if you want to have a social influencer internally, you've got to get someone who understands and has some. It might be someone in your business who's really insightful in that industry. They just don't know how to use social, or they just haven't put themselves on a social profile. What I'd suggest you've got to do is weigh up the long term to the short term. How much do we need to invest in time to get them to be a social influencer? Because you don't just switch it on. You don't just put them on a social platform, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is, LinkedIn, where the audience is for your persona, and give them some content, they share it, and you're done. It doesn't work that way. It takes a long time. So, for example, in cloud, as I said, I fell into this accidentally. Once you get the snowball running, it gets easier. I write for certain magazines now and blog, as you described at the beginning, for some companies, and that helps. And so you create a knock-on effect where one thing begets another because you get spotted. But you have to be good at progressing it and not. So I started doing this. Let me try and think. Around 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. When social was early, and initially, I'll be frank with you, I was on Twitter. You can check when I created a Twitter account. I was LinkedIn and accidentally started to do a bit of blogging for someone and realised, actually, there's something here. Okay, and I've got a little bit better at it. I've learned, but it's not an overnight thing to create your own social influencer, unless, boy, if they got market profile already, that if they went to a journalist, everyone is going to jump, then they've already got the influence. You just haven't put it onto the different platforms. That's different. But if they don't have the influence already and you're trying to create it, because they can create good content, they're a good speaker, it's going to take time. And you need to just bear with that and understand your results are going to come even further down the line. It takes time to create an influencer.
And just going to move on then to this, this leads on to this point about how to actually get a bigger program started. Because I think we often work with companies who know that they should be doing something more with influencers, and maybe have done a few little bits and pieces, but there's no ongoing kind of strategy and ongoing program. And so often we're trying to help organizations we work with actually get started in a more structured way. Just on the screen here is just a kind of a model for a sort of maybe 6 month program. But from your experience, both in a nasty box, but also as an influencer work with other organizations, what are the sort of practical things that, let's say someone's listening to this and they are a marketing or comms person at a organization, they want to get something started, but it's just not happened. What are some of the practical things that they can do to actually start getting an organized long-term program in place to get just to start sort of testing the waters a bit?
Sure. So firstly, I'll say about the testing, you've got to have a bit of a long-term approach to this. If it's a B2C product that flies off the shelves, it's a great consumable product, you're going to get a quicker reaction, a quicker ROI and measurement, etc. Because that's pretty easy, right? If it's something which is a bit more long, more valued business solution sale, it will take time, and often the other challenge for marketing is it's not always quantifiable, because you do stuff on social. Think about like you're all used to, is putting tracking links in like you would a marketing campaign. Make sure each of your social influencers has a tracking campaign link, because if not, you're not going to be able to track this back. Someone looks at social, they click on it and come through. It's just generic. So you're going to see it as a web chat lead or a web lead. You're not going to be able to attribute it to, was this generated from social? So you need to be able to track it and think about that first. But yeah, you need to figure out a program. You need to have a content schedule. What's this look like? Is it short tweet? What makes this interesting? Not just let's churn the old stuff out. And it needs to have a variety. And you need to feed your influencer and have a conversation at the beginning with, right, we want a 6-month campaign, and we want to have a constant feed of stuff out. Some of it is customer quotes. Some of it is thought leadership videos we're going to produce or have. Some is blogs. Some is content we'd like you to do. So you've got that mixture of content styles and types. And it's got to be progressive and long. You can't do this, turn it on, and expect to see in 4 weeks' time have one of your board or your marketing CEO, etc., saying, "Let's see results yet." And I've had that, right? I've lived that in different varieties of consulting, advising companies and businesses. Of, oh, great, that social got such amplification, it trended against that particular hashtag, etc. That's fantastic. Haven't seen the flood of leads though. Doesn't work that way. This is
that because people are thinking with an advertising hat on?
I think it's because they're thinking of the old world of you expect a direct correlation and quickly, and social doesn't work that way. It's very transient. So if you think about it, if you go and look at tweets now, anyone on here as an example, how far back do you scroll? You'll open it up, you look at your feed of who you follow, and you'll scroll back a little bit, maybe while you're in the taxi or whatever, but you don't scroll back throughout the whole day and check everything that happened in the past 24 hours. So you've got to have stuff repeatedly into that feed. This isn't do one tweet and everyone's going to see it. So you've got to have a scheduled programmatic piece at different times of the day for different territories. If you get a social influencer in the UK and you want to influence globally, are they, a question about, do they have influence around the globe? Do they have other influencers in Australia, for example, that will reshare it for them? Or do they share it themselves at different times? Because that's great. If I share it at 11 o'clock in the morning here, who in Australia is going to view it? If I share it at 8 in the morning, etc., it's not going to be in their feed because the time they're probably not looking at it or they're in bed asleep. So you need to think about these things of, it's not as simple as people think it is, as to just get someone out there, get them to do a couple of shares, and the floodgates will open.
Yeah.
Now the audience has changed, as we all have. We're more transient. We dip in and out of social, and it's like advertising on TV. I say to people, someone runs an advert, they may have run it 50 times in the past 3 days or 5 days. You just haven't seen it 50. You may have seen it 3. But that's the same with social. You've got to be putting stuff out, interjected amongst other stuff at different times through different social influencers, in the hope that your audience is watching that program, so to speak, when that advert comes on in the blip. Now, if I'm on a different channel or I don't watch that program, you need to, how am I going to catch you on a different viewing? You don't run a TV ad in one place one time and then we're done. You think about where your biodynamic is, what type of program they watch. That's where we need to advertise. And how many times do we advertise? Do we do it every time it advertises in the block? Do we do it once a night during the week? You figure out what you can afford, and then think a plan of how do I most likely get in the view of my buyer, and how many times do I need them to see it? Because you don't see it once and I'm done, unless you've got the most incredible off-the-page product in the world.
Also to come back to something you mentioned earlier, I said I would come back to, is GDPR. It does, I've actually written 2 emails today to people about GDPR. Obviously it's raising a lot of questions for people. It's still kind of early days in seeing how the law is going to really impact things. And we're waiting to see that at some point there'll be some cases to do with GDPR. But what's your sort of thoughts on how GDPR changes the current paradigm of working with influencers, if indeed it does?
I think it's going to make it more interesting. Anyone on the line, and I'm sure there's a lot of marketing people will be listening now or listen to the recording, and they're all, I'm sure, aware of the challenges of GDPR and have been going through it over the past year or months, or are still going through the debates of what do I need to change, what can I still do, what can't I do, how does this make it difficult, how do I stay compliant, etc. What you got to think about is with social, forget influencers initially, with social, if someone is following you, your content, they are self-opted in and can self-opt out at any point on that social platform. You have no GDPR responsibility because you haven't opted them in and you're not storing their data. The social platform is linking them to you with their opt-in to the social platform, not you. They haven't in any way contacted you. They have chosen to follow your account. So it sort of cleans that bit up for you, number one. If you then look at influencers, you're even one step removed, because if people are following the influencer in your sector because of whatever they're involved in, whether it be beauty products, whether it be the cloud, whether it be the motor industry, they're following them generically because of that sector, not because of you. So you're removed, but if you can get your data into there in a feed in a way that fits in with that social influencer, you're getting to your buyer persona on a regular basis. They've opted in to follow someone who's independent, but they're getting to see your stuff. So it's an aid. I think we're going to see more people, and it's up for other, I'm sure there'll be debate and people agree and don't disagree who are listening from marketing, who will look to move more towards how do I utilize social more than traditional marketing methods, particularly like email, where I could get it wrong easier. You can't buy lists in anymore and take that chance. You need to clean up your old data. You need to keep clean. So I'm not saying that'll go away, but I think social is, people are going to look at this more closely, and particularly with influencers who have the following and have the influence to other people. How do I leverage this stuff that's been around for a while in different ways because of the implications of what's now happened?
Great, thanks for that. So yeah, that was a question from me, but I do want to give people listening a chance to ask questions now as well. So if you're in the Bright Talk console, then there's a questions panel, so you can just type in a question there, and I'll pick through the questions and read them out to Ian. If you're listening to this later on, then you can always contact us, either Ian or contact me directly. Our details are on the screen. And we've got your blog sites there, but we haven't got your email actually on there. But yeah, if you need to get in touch with Ian, we can also put you in touch. I do have a question here actually from the Bright Talk panel. It's when just starting out working with an influencer, roughly how long do you think it would be before I should start to see results?
So it's a very valid question, which there's no answer for, and I'll tell you why. Because for that, I don't know who asked that question, but as I think I've alluded to along the way, it depends what your product is and depends what your market and your buyer persona is and your price point. If you're selling something which is consumable, think of the shopping channel on QVC, that's immediacy, right? It's the price point is something mostly where people can just buy quickly. It's consumable, and they're targeting the audience, have a beauty section or a jewelry section or an exercise section. So the people who are tuned in and staying on during that section have self-qualified them in to they're interested in that type of product. You don't sit there, I think, as an 85-year-old man watching a beauty thing on hair products or how to do enamel jewelry or whatever it is, probably using the wrong terms, but because you're not the buyer, you'd switch over. So you sort of self-qualify, and so it's the same on social, right? If you get the right social influencer who's got the right audience, now what's your product? What's your product proposition that's going out there? Is it something which is simply to understand? We give you a charger for your phone, which is very economical. It's only $14, £14, whatever, and it gives you 50% more charge than any other charger on the market. And look at this neat feature we've got where it's got built-in adapters for every different type of phone. Boom. You're going to get pickup. I do it on Instagram. I spot things that are low value, often for the kids, and you spot and look at it and go, oh, I like that. grabs your attention, and I've multiple times clicked, gone straight through and bought, because it's a neat little low-cost purchase. Flip side that to what you're selling or what you're trying to influence is either a high-cost consumer purchase, like a car you mentioned there, Alistair, or something like that, or it's a complex purchase for business where you have to go through a cycle. What you're trying to get there is people to be aware it's available and hopefully to engage with you on a website or to follow you as more interesting or to start to look. But you're not going to, so you may get leads or inquiries or people at your website, but it might not be immediate. You know, I often see things that are higher price and think, well, I'll have a look at that, but I'm not jumping right to now and I'll bookmark or save it. I might go back to it 2 or 3 months later when I get time, because I know it's going to take me time to consider and look at it. Maybe it's a holiday. Oh, that's an interesting place to go, but I'm not ready to look at it yet. So it's not as simple as just put it out there and answer that question. It's what's the product, what's the price point, what's the influencer type. You know, the gaming community, if you've got the latest new game coming out and you get one of the top gamers to show himself playing it, people will be queuing up. What's the buying persona you've got today and what's their cycle? Because you're not going to change that dramatically because of using social. What you're looking to do with social is get people to notice you and engage with you who you may not have found otherwise.
Yes. Another question that's come through is, what is the best way to motivate internal subject matter experts and salespeople to participate and be active in the program and become influencers as well?
Yeah, so that's a good one. So it's a variety of things. What's in it for them? That's the first thing. So, because people have different motivations, right? Some may be, actually, I'm really interested in this and I'd love to be an influencer, but I don't know how to do it. So if you're going to help coach me, provide me some training. So for example, Tim Hughes, who has on the side, does expert social selling. He's the best-selling book author of a social selling book, helps companies train their people how to do social selling, right? So you can get someone to help, and that's a value to that individual of you're developing a new skill in them, but you're getting as a byproduct of that is them using that skill. So that's one value that could be there. It could be that you run, depending on the nature of it, I've seen contests run of who can get the most interaction. We'll give you each a campaign code, and whoever can get the most interaction or sales back through that. And that you can run that depending on, again, your product, your market, and the size of your business. That can result back in you paying bonuses to non-salespeople, right? So if someone in finance, if you're in accounting, but they work in your finance team, you're selling accounting products, whatever, but they don't sell them, but they're in that community and they share it, and you give them a unique tracking link and say, look, anyone that comes off this and buys, you'll get a commission off of it. And I've done that on some social stuff. I'll give an example to relate to that, although not as an employee, where someone's come to me with something that's relevant to the sector and my background, and it's happened recently, and said, look, we've got this really good training material. We're going to give you free access to it. So there's a value to you straight away. You don't have to pay. We'll give you, and that saves you this. If you share it, we'll also give you a commission. We'll give you a unique tracking link. If you share it amongst your community where this fits as training materials and people buy it, we'll pay you a little commission on every one. And I've already had a couple come through, and all I'm doing is sharing it. So I'm on a commission-only basis, if you think about it, but it's not a lot of effort. And it's working because I've got the right audience for that piece. You could do that for employees. So you don't pay anything out unless it creates a little bit of competition. And from that, you'll also find out who's got the right audience. If someone particularly has a lot of success, then you might have a different conversation with them about, what if we write some guest blogs for you, but put them under your name? But we'll help write it because you're not particularly good at writing. You talk us through it in the meeting. Marketing will do the wording. But let's talk about it. So it's your thoughts, but we'll guest write it for you. Therefore, you make a little star out of them. People have different motivations, right? So you need to find out what their motivation is. I don't think there's one size fits all. And also what your company's propensity is. Some may not want to pay bonuses to different people for doing it that way.
I find chocolate biscuits work, but that might just be me.
Simple options you can do.
But, I find chocolate biscuits work, but that may just be me. I'm open to bribery with Jaffa cakes as well, but if anyone's listening.
You're obviously a little cheap there, Alistair.
Yeah, just another question was, how many influencers should I plan to work with in order to maximise success? 10, 20, 50? I think on the slide I had before, I had a model with maybe sort of 50 on, but I can guess it varies. But what's a good way of sort of thinking what number to start off with?
Think about a couple of things there. What's your rate? Are you going global or territory? And so that's an easy start point, right? Because if you said to me, Ian, you've got cloud influence, and I've got followers around the world, and etc. But guess what? If you said to me, we want to promote our products in Australia, I'm going to say to you, that's great. I'm not the best person to do that because that's not my focal point. But I know the social influencer for cloud there in Australia who is. Because I'd have some coverage. If you said it's global, well, that Australian person will have global, but more predominantly Australia. Mine will be more predominantly UK and certainly Europe. So that might define, well, actually, therefore, we want to have one on each continent or multiple each continent, or, you know what I mean? So you need to look at, again, what's your product, what's your traditional marketing type planning. How would we do this, and what's it look like? What's the landscape we were trying to get to? Both and you can look at this on all the demographics, age, vertical market, territory, and figure out, okay, who are the influencers in that space, and who do we need? I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. And there'll be a different price. If you go in the motoring industry, we want one of the top motoring journalists to be an influencer. If they're open to doing that, they're going to have a bigger ticket price than 10 who have built up their own reputation on social media. Which one do you want to go for? So often budgets will restrict you by definition. If we want to market some jewellery, well, the easiest one is, as we've described, go for someone like the Kardashians or a big major mainstream actress, Liz Hurley or something like that. It's going to cost you a fortune. If you don't have that budget, you don't have that luxury, you need to start thinking, how far down the food chain do we need to come? And as you come down further, you go broader. You'll need more to cover more ground, particularly if it's a consumer product in the mass market. So what you're looking at is not just how many followers they've got, but who they can leverage onwardly from.
And so it also will depend on how many people internally you've got. If you've got colleagues who can take part in the, building the relationships, like the previous question, if you've got a bunch of internal subject matter experts wanting to support the process, you could potentially engage with a much larger group of influencers as well. A good way of doing it, a good way of starting, and I think you had it on there, but a good indicator of one of the ways of getting this going and making you, and add to this question, is if you've got a big event coming up, a yearly customer event or something like that, you could get influencers along, depending on the scale of your event, get a bunch of them along, and at that point try and get a feel for what you need. That's your toe in the water, so to speak, of what coverage do you get. So whilst that was in your program, and it's a good way of doing it and using influencers, because then you can get them to do video while they're there. You can get a multitude of things out of the one piece, and you're in front of them. But you also get to know them a little bit, right? And you can suss out and discuss other things you might do, and who knows each other, and this sort of thing. So it's a good sounding ground early on in the process as well, because you're actually in front of them rather than remotely. It's not always possible, right? Depending on their location, etc. But again, horribly, I know people want a black and white answer, do A, B, C, and it fix it. I'd love to give you them. There's so much variance in this, depending on the product, the market, the demographic you're looking at. But apply traditional marketing thoughts in the planning. Who's your persona? Who are we trying to get to? How many do we need to reach? What's our attract rate from the website? If we get 10,000 visitors, do we get 3 transactions? Use some of those demographics to start you off from, those metrics, to formulate at least a starting plan. And then you need to dip your toe in the water, work with some influencers based on that's your starting framework, and then be agile and adjust that framework as you go along. Understand that social might deliver you different results, because they may drive, for example, more focused traffic to your website, so your ratio of conversion from the website to an MQL through to an SQL, etc., may be greater because the persona of the followers and the audience you've now targeted is more aligned with your perfect persona. Therefore, you may get a higher ratio. You don't know that yet. Yeah, well, thank you. I'm realising we're at the end of our hour pretty much. Thank you very much for your time, Ian. Some really great insights there. And as mentioned before, if you're not following Ian on Twitter already, he's at Moyse, that's IMOYSE, and look up Ian on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'd welcome people getting in touch with you on LinkedIn as well. And those are Ian's two places where he blogs, so check those out as well. And also, yeah, you can follow us as well and subscribe to our newsletter. But we'll be doing more of these, so if you're not already subscribed to our Bright Talk channel, follow us on there, and you'll get notifications of other webinars that we'll be doing in the coming months.
I would encourage, based on you're on here and listening to this, follow Onalytica, because I've found great insight from the content that's shared. And I hope I'm not blowing your trumpet here, but the content that's been shared, and I find it a really useful resource. I'm still learning, right? This is an ongoing thing. This is changing all the time, and new insights. And I get a lot of value from the reports and data that come out from Onalytica. So I would encourage people, I'm not getting sponsored for this, by the way, but I would encourage people to follow it. Why wouldn't you? And you'll get some great further insights and knowledge on this on an ongoing basis.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and just for those listening, just after we end the presentation, there'll be a little prompt from Bright Talk to give us some feedback and a rating. We'd love to know what you thought and maybe topics that you'd like us to cover in future. But yeah, thank you, Ian, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. Thank you. Bye-bye.